We have with us today two award-winning singer-songwriter storytellers, Judith Heineman and Amy Lowe, who are going to do folk tales. They're going to take us on a little journey. So I'd like to ask you to welcome the two of them this morning as we begin.
Thank you so much. It's been many, many, many years since I was here before. And if the children want to sit up at this stand seems to block us, but if they would like to sit here, they're more than welcome to sit here. So there is a caveat. I don't know if it's been advertised, but today we're telling Grimm's Grimmest, the darker side of fairy tales, and we recommend them for ages 10 and older. But if you have very sophisticated children, as I'm sure you do, these are really the bloodiest and the goriest of the Grimm tales, as were originally meant for adults. And the psychologists like Bruno Bettelheim, I always do this disclaimer, have really talked about how important it is for the children to hear the stories without the Disneyfied endings. Because, believe it or not, these stories are instructive and seem to organically give them survival mechanisms when they internalize the bravery of the heroes and heroines in these dark tales. And then we actually have some lighter fare because we knew that there would be some children here. So at the end, we will have it more children-friendly. Even though this is okay, but you look like you really will be able to take these stories. Oh, and there was a wonderful old storyteller who came from Selma, Alabama, whose name was Catherine Wyndham. And she said, if any stories ever frighten you, this is what you do. You take your slippers and you put them next to your bed and you point one shoe in one direction and the other shoe in the other direction, and it'll confuse any bad spirits and you'll be just fine. Do you want this higher?
A little bit, yeah. Just lowered it so I could see, but I can't see you. But you can scoot over and see me. Hi. So we're going to start with, we have 3 Grimm tales we're going to tell, and each of these tales has a song or songs. And these Grimm tales and the songs came from
Dan
Marcotte.
Right, who has been here also, my partner of 16 years, but now he's giving our blessing for Amy to step into the show while he has some other very demanding work.
And this first tale is called The Mouse, the Bird, and the Sausage. And it has a sing-along. And your part is to say, tweet, tweet, tweet. Try that. Tweet, tweet, tweet. Squeak, squeak, squeak.
Squeak, squeak, squeak. And sausage.
So here we go. The bird, the mouse, and the sausage. The bird gathered wood, tweet, tweet, tweet. Mouse made the fire,
squeak, squeak, squeak.
And the sausage stirred the soup. Sausage. Sausage stirred the soup. Sausage. Well, that's so good. Well, one day, a bird, a mouse, and a sausage took up house together in the forest. Each had an important job to do. Bird, his job was to gather wood from the forest and bring it back to the house. Mouse, his job was to set the table and start the fire for cooking. And sausage, his job was to cook the meal. He would spend the entire day stirring the soup, and at the end of the day, he would jump into that boiling pot and slither his sausagey juices through the soup, giving it that extra German flavor. The bird gathered wood, tweet, tweet, tweet. Mouse made the fire,
squeak, squeak, squeak.
And sausage stirred the soup.
Sausage.
Nice. Sausage stirred the soup.
Sausage.
Well, Bird decided one day that this was most unfair. I mean, he felt that gathering wood was the most difficult job of all, and he was doing all the hard work, and after all, what did the mouse have to do? He simply started the fire, set the table, then he could spend the rest of his day lounging around. And Sausage, what did he do? He stirred the soup. And after much arguing, they agreed to draw lots and switch jobs. So now, Bird made the fire,
Tweet, tweet, tweet.
Mouse stirred the soup,
Squeak, squeak, squeak.
and Sausage gathered the wood. Sausage. Sausage gathered the wood.
Sausage.
Well, you can imagine. German forests are no place for a wandering smoked sausage. No sooner had he started to gather wood when he was eaten by a hungry dog. Well, the sausage did not return home, and Bird decided to go look for him. And when he found out what had happened, he was very, very sad. So he returned to the house and he explained to Mouse that their friend had been eaten by a dog. Despite their loss, they went on with their day. Now Bird made the fire, tweet, tweet, tweet. Mouse stirred the soup,
Squeak, squeak, squeak.
but the sausage was eaten by a dog. Sausage. Sausage was eaten by a dog. Sausage. Well, the end of the day, the soup was almost ready. Mouse remembered how Sausage would jump into that pot and slither his sausagey juices through the soup, giving it that extra German flavor. Before Bird could stop him, Mouse lifted up the lid, jumped into the pot, and within moments was boiled to death. Bird made the fire,
Tweet, tweet, tweet.
Mouse was boiled to death.
Squeak, squeak, squeak.
Sausage was eaten by a dog.
Sausage.
Sausage was eaten by a dog.
Sausage.
Oh no, Bird tried to save his friend, but birds, they're clumsy with wood and fire and such things, and he stumbled into the fire. He tripped, knocked over the pot, and soon the entire house went up in flames, and the bird was burned alive. Bird was burned alive.
Tweet, tweet, tweet.
Mouse was boiled to death.
Squeak, squeak, squeak.
Sausage was eaten by a dog.
Sausage.
Sausage was eaten by a dog.
Sausage.
I bet you're hoping that there's a moral to this story. Some thread of wisdom that ties this hopeless tragedy together. Well, take from it what you will. After all, this is a Grimm tale. And that's pretty much it. But there's still a song, so here we go. Even without rhyme and reason, let's sing it. Here we go. Bird was burned alive. Tweet, tweet, tweet. Mouse boiled to death.
Squeak, squeak, squeak.
Sausage was eaten by a dog. Sausage. Sausage was eaten by a dog. Sausage. It's a little dog, too. Sausage was eaten by a dog. Sausage. Thank you. Thank you, Dan Marcotte.
So you see how this is going. So I thought I would tell you the story, the real story of Sleeping Beauty. Now, if you think that the prince kissed Sleeping Beauty and she fluttered open her eyelashes and flung her arms about his neck and they all lived, you're sadly mistaken. Because there's a whole other story. But just in case it's been a long time since you visited Sleeping Beauty, I thought we'd do a quick recap. If you remember, there was a king and queen, and they longed for a child. And a daughter, Briar Rose, was born to them. And they were so excited they were going to have a huge christening, a huge party, and invite all the fairies of the kingdom to come and bestow gifts upon this wonderful princess. So they had services made out of gold, forks and knives and spoons with gold encrusted in gems and diamonds and rubies and emeralds and pearls. But there was one old crone who had been out of touch for a long time, and she got wind of this invitation at the very last minute. And when the king and queen learned about this, they realized they didn't have enough gold to make a service for her, so they made it out of lead. And when she came to the banquet table and she saw that her service was made out of lead and not gold and encrusted with stones, she took great offense. And there was a good fairy who knew when she heard the old crone muttering that when it was time to bestow their gifts that she would be up to no good. So she, the good fairy, hid behind a curtain. And sure enough, the time came where all the fairies stepped up and bestowed their gifts upon the sleeping princess. May you have a beautiful singing voice. May you have musical ability. May you have a kind and generous heart. May you be loving and caring always. And then the old crone came and said, and when you are 15 years old, you shall prick your finger on a spindle, and you shall die. Well, it's a very sharp end of a spinning wheel. It's like a little pin. And so the good fairy, who was hiding behind the curtain, came out and said, my magic is not as strong as the old crone's. I cannot undo everything, but I can mitigate it somewhat. When she's 15 years old, yes, she will prick her finger on a spindle, but she will not die. She will fall into a deep, deep sleep for 100 years until the right Prince Charming comes by and kisses her awake. And so the king tried to banish all the old ladies and all the spindles from the kingdom, but curses will out. And when our Briar Rose was 15 years old, she started wandering around the castle. What staircase is this? It was a stone stair that she had never seen before, and up the stairs she went. Oh, there was a little oaken door, and she pushed it, and inside was the oldest woman she had ever seen, who beckoned to her and said, oh, come in, my dear. Oh. Our sleeping beauty, about to be, looked and said, what is that thing? And she said, it's a spindle, my dear. Would you like to try it? Oh, yes, I would. And as soon as her finger touched the sharp spindle, she fell into a deep, deep sleep. Now the good fairy had heard about this, and she flew to her side, lifted her up, and placed her upstairs on her bed on a coverlet with golden and silver threads. And so she wouldn't be frightened when she awakened 100 years hence. She put a sleeping spell on everyone in the kingdom except the king and queen. And the little cat who was lapping up the milk, he fell asleep just where he was. The little boy chasing the groom fell asleep where he was. Even the fire in the grate fell asleep where it was. And the cook stirring the batter for a delicious cake just fell asleep where he was. But the king and queen had to go out and finish ruling. And so they went upstairs and they kissed their daughter goodbye and they left the castle. As soon as they left, a forest of brambles and thorns completely engulfed the palace. All you could see were the little turrets sticking out of the top. Oh, rumors started. And over the years, many princes had heard that there was a sleeping beauty in the wood, and many princes tried, and many princes died. The thorns would scratch out their eyes, blinding them, and the brambles would hold them fast until they were nothing more than pieces of rotting meat. Almost 100 years went by when a prince from a neighboring kingdom came trotting by. And he noticed the turrets and the forest, and he wondered, and he asked the neighboring farmer, could this be? Is this the enchanted castle where the beauty lay in the wood? And he said, oh, my grandfather told me that it could be an old wives' tale. I don't know, there could be ogres, there could be witches, there could be trolls, there could be danger, but there could be a beauty in the wood. Well, he was very sure of himself, and so on his horse he trotted up to the front door, to the front of the forest. He touched his sword to the tip of the brambles, and whoosh, the forest parted. And as soon as he trotted in, whoosh, the forest closed behind him without harming him at all. And he came to the door and he pushed it open, and "Ooh," he said, "it smells kind of musty and moldy, but not quite of death." And he came inside and he saw all the people sleeping there, and he looked at them, and they were not dead. And he knew he was in the enchanted castle, and found the staircase. Up the staircase he went, and there was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen, lying on the coverlet of golden and silver threads, although, of course, her outfit was 100 years out of date. He was drawn to her lips like a magnet, but she had been given a dream about him and had been dreaming of him for 100 years. So when their lips met, and she flung her arms around his neck and opened her eyes, you could be sure they had no need of sleep that night. The next morning, they went downstairs, and the cook created a wonderful wedding cake. And imagine, the batter was not even moldy after all those years. And the fire came back in the grate. The little cat was lapping up the milk that was also still fresh, and they were married. And now it's when the story gets interesting. Because you see, the prince's mother was not all human. She was an ogress, and she liked to eat young children. Now, you may think that mothers-in-law and ogresses are synonymous, but in this case, it was the literal truth. So he was not going to reveal that he was married. And so every few weeks he would escape from his own palace, he would go into the woods, and he would live with Briar Rose, his beloved. And his father was always wondering, "Where are you going?" And his father was much more gullible, and he would say, "Oh, I have so many cares of the kingdom. I met a hermit in the wood, and I stay in his hovel, and eventually all my cares go away." But his mother was much more suspicious, and she tried to follow him, but he always lost her. Now, this went on for 2 years, and during that time they had 2 children, Dawn and Day, and he certainly wasn't going to tell his mother, the ogress, that now there were grandchildren. But after these 2 years, his own father, the king, died, and our Prince Charming had to assume the crown and the duties of the kingdom. He wasn't going to leave his family alone in the woods anymore. So he brought his wife and his 2 children to his own castle. And he said, "Mother, you were right. I was keeping a secret from you, and this is my wife, your daughter-in-law, Briar Rose, and I'd like to introduce you to your 2 grandchildren, Dawn and Day." And she said, "Oh my, how delighted I am to meet them." And he said, "Mother, you will suppress your ogress appetites." "Oh, yes, son," she said, I promise. And a few months went by, and things were going along very well. Oh, but then war broke out in a neighboring kingdom, and our Prince Charming, now the king, had to go off and defend the lands. And he said to his mother, "Mother, I do not know how long I'm going to be gone. It could be 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, but when I get back, my children and my wife better be as healthy and happy as they are today." "Oh, yes, son," she promised, and off he went to defend the lands. Well, she really tried. But sometimes you just cannot deny your nature. And after about 3 or 4 months, the voices started swirling in her head and gave her no rest. And all she heard was flesh. Can you say that with me? Flesh, flesh, flesh. She needed to eat young flesh, and she summoned the cook. And she said, "Cook, cook, I command you to cook up young Dawn." Your granddaughter?" "Yes." Well, he could not disobey. She was his queen, after all. Oh, madam," he said, "well, how shall I prepare her?" She thought. "In a nice white sauce." Well, there was nothing for it. So he took his knife, and he sharpened it. You can do this with me. And up the stairs he crept. And there was that innocent chest rising and falling, and he steeled himself, and he really made no sound. But something must have awakened the child, because Dawn awakened and said, "Oh, cook, cook, it's the middle of the night. Are we going on an adventure? What fun is this?" And he let the knife clatter to the ground. He couldn't harm this child, scooped her up and took her out to his cabin in the wood and said to his wife, "Wife, what should I do? The queen has commanded that I cook up young Dawn." And she said, "How?" And he said, "In a nice white sauce." And she said, "This is what you do. You substitute a suckling pig in your white sauce. She'll never know the difference." And that's just what he did.
You see, the ogre's stomach growled and groaned. She needed to eat flesh. She looked at Dawn, licked her lips, put the cook to the test. She told the cook her up in a sauce so nice and white. Instead, he cooked a suckling pig and hid young Dawn from sight. With a munch and a crunch on the bones and flesh, with a munch and a crunch on the meat so fresh. Eat that child in a nice white sauce. We'll show these kids who's boss.
Oh, this was delicious. She sucked the flesh off the bones. She let the juices run down her chin and onto her clothes so she could have tasty, tiny morsels for a midnight snack. Oh, things went along very, very well for a while. She really tried, and a few more months passed by, but the voices started in her head, and the cravings started, and she couldn't resist, and all she could hear was flesh, flesh, flesh. She needed to eat young flesh, and she summoned the cook. She said, "Cook, you did such a great job last time. Now I command you to cook young Day." "Madam, your grandson?" "Yes." Well, he could not disobey. "Well, madam, how would you like me to prepare him?" She thought. "Oh, in a nice green sauce." Well, this time he said, "I'm going to do it." And he took his knife and he sharpened it. And he steeled himself to be just so quiet and make this as swift and painless as possible. And he came up those stairs. He pushed open the door without a sound, and there was innocent Day's chest rising and falling. And he was about to plunge the knife into his sleeping chest when the air must have changed or some sort of noise, and Day awakened and said, "Cook, how exciting. It's the middle of the night. Are we going on an adventure? What game is this?" And he couldn't harm this child either. He let the knife clatter to the ground, scooped the child up, and brought him out to his wife in the wood, and said, "Wife, dear wife, now the queen has commanded me to cook up young Day." "Well, how?" she said. In a nice green sauce." She said, "This is what you'll do. You'll substitute a little lamb. Your green sauce, perfection. She'll never know the difference." And that's just what he did.
Yes, the ogre's stomach growled and groaned. She needed more flesh. She looked at Day, licked her lips, gave the cook no rest. She told the cook him up in a sauce so fine and green. Instead, he cooked a little lamb, tender, soft, and lean, with a munch and a crunch on the bones and flesh, with a munch and a crunch on the meat so fresh. Eat that child in a fine green sauce. Let's show these kids who's boss.
This was so delicious. Not only did she let the juices run down her chin and onto her clothing, she saved little tiny pieces of meat that she put in her pocket. And the more maggoty and moldy they got, the more delicious they were. She even put some in her underwear. Things went along pretty well for a while. Oh, yes, they did. But then those cravings and the voices gave her no rest. And all she could hear was flesh, 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 flesh. She needed to eat young flesh. And she summoned the cook and said, "Cook, you did such a good job with my grandchildren. Now I command you to cook my daughter-in-law." Briar rose. "Yes. Well, madam, how would you like me to prepare her?" She thought. In a sauce well spiced. This time, he took his longest knife and sharpened it on that whetstone so that the kill would be as swift and painless as possible. And up the stairs he went, and he steeled himself, and this time I shall do it. I shall do it. He made no sound at all. He pushed open that door. But when he did, there was Briar Rose waiting for him, and she ripped open her blouse, and she said, yes, take that knife and plunge it here right into my heart so that I could be reunited with my children, Dawn and Day. And he said, shh, "Shh, madam, it's not what you think." And he let the knife clatter to the ground. He said, "Take my hand." Took her hand, and out they went into the forest in the woods and took her back to his cabin. And there were her children, dawn and day, just as happy as they were. And now he said to his wife, "I have a dilemma. What am I going to do? The queen has commanded that I cook up briar rose." "How?" she said. "In a sauce well spiced." And the wife took her measure, and she said, "Well, her skin isn't as soft and tender as the children. She has a lot more meat on her bones. So I know, if you substitute a young deer in a sauce well spiced, that will be perfection." And that's just what he did.
The ogress and the growled and groaned. She needed something more. She looked around, and there she saw her tasty daughter-in-law. She told the cook her up in a sauce well spiced. Instead she cooked a
Doe.
A deer?
A female deer.
And served it up with spice, with a munch and a crunch on the bones and flesh, with a munch and a crunch on the meat so fresh. Eat your daughter-in-law well spiced, eat your daughter-in-law with spice.
Oh, this was delicious. Oh, she had so much extra meat that she put them in pockets. She put them everywhere, and she was delighted and satisfied for a good 6 months. Oh, the memory of that meal swirled around in her body, and she was happy. But then it dissipated, and she felt those cravings again, and the voices flash, flash, flash. She was drawn to find young flesh. So she started to wander about the castle to see if maybe there was an errant servant child wandering about that she could gobble up. But there was no child that night. And it was a lovely, warm summer evening, and she decided she would go out and walk in the forest, and she went a bit further than she had ever gone before. What is that? What do I hear? Children laughing? A mother singing to them? Whose hut is this? And she pushed open the door, and there she saw the cook, his wife, her daughter-in-law, her grandchildren. She said, "Cook, cook, you have betrayed me, and for this, tomorrow, you shall all be my lunch. And don't try to escape. My soldiers will come and truss you up like turkeys." And so she prepared a huge cauldron at the end of the cobblestone courtyard, and inside was roiling and boiling water and slithy things and poisonous creatures and toads and creatures that could just suck the flesh off the bones in an instant. The next morning, the soldiers gathered all the people tied up. The satisfied queen licked her lips in anticipation and was just about to push them down that cobblestone courtyard into the cauldron when, what do we hear? It is our Prince Charming returning victorious from the wars.
Da 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 da.
He took one look at the scene, and he knew that his mother had not suppressed her ogress appetites. And she looked at him, and she knew that he would show her no mercy. So in a rage, in a fit, she herself ran down that cobblestone courtyard, and she jumped into that boiling and roiling cauldron with the vipers and the toads and the flesh-eating creatures, and she was boiled alive, and all her flesh was sucked off her bones. She was no more. But it is now, only now, that he untied them all. He kissed his children, and he kissed his dear sleeping beauty in the wood briar rose. And it is now, only now, when they all indeed did live happily ever after. The real story of Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. That wasn't too scary for you kids, right? I did want to tell you, though, that the Grimm brothers collected these stories from French noblewomen who came and visited and who had heard many of these stories from their servants as well. And it's in a wonderful collection from 1697 by Charles Perrault, which I have here. It's that blue book, and I can show you later. And Gustave Doré did beautiful etchings of these old pictures of Sleeping Beauty in the wood. And the ogre story and the Sleeping Beauty story was one story in the original French. And we know the Grimm brothers knew that. But in the first edition, 1812, 1815, they separated the two stories. But I put them back to when they really were meant to be. So thanks. I'm just going to take a sip of water. Ooh. My special skull cup. My elixir. Ooh. Now the next story is one of my favorites. It's called the Juniper Tree. And the reason I liked it so much is because it was the bloodiest and the goriest of all the stories. Until there was a new edition, Jack Zipes, who is the American scholar, the genius on the Grimm brothers, and also is quite a lovely supporter of our work. He was having a brand new edition come out, and it was being debuted at the Goethe Institute, and invited me and Dan to come and launch the party. And he said, "Oh, I can't wait to hear what you'll do with the children who play at slaughtering." Well, we're not going to do that for you today, but that is the worst. So when I thought the Juniper Tree was the worst and bloodiest and goriest, no, that one is. It's a lot of fun, but maybe not for today. So in any case, the Juniper Tree. There was once a beautiful and pious young woman who was married to a very wealthy merchant. And she longed for a child. Every day she would stand outside beneath her beloved juniper tree and pray for a child. And one day in winter, when snow was on the ground, she was outside under her tree, and she was paring an apple with a sharp knife when she, pricked her finger, and a drop of blood fell on the snow. And she wished, "Oh, if I could only have a child as red as blood and as white as snow, how happy I would be." And all of a sudden, she felt as though her prayers would be answered. And the next month, the snow melted. And the next month, the green grass grew. And the next month, the tree trunk thickened. And the next month, there were blossoms on the branches. And the next month, there were ripe juniper berries. And the next month, she was ravenous hungry. And the next month, she ate of those juniper berries, and she became ill. And she said to her husband, "Dear husband, if I should die, please bury me here beneath the juniper tree." And he promised he would. And the next month, she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy who was indeed as red as blood and as white as snow. And she held him to her heart and to her breast, and her heart was so overjoyed that it burst, and she died. And as was her wish, her husband buried her beneath the juniper tree. Oh, he tried to raise this child by himself, he really did, but he realized he couldn't do it, and so he took another wife. Married again, and with his new wife they had a daughter whom they named Marlinchin. Oh, his wife doted on Marlinchin. There was nothing she wouldn't do for that daughter, but she hated that boy. She kept thinking, how will I get all my husband's money just for me and my daughter and none for that boy? In fact, she never even called him by name, and she made his life a living hell. She wouldn't allow him to sit at the dining room table anymore. She made him sit on the stairs, and she would only serve him leftovers and scraps of rotting meat. When he came home from school, she abused him verbally and physically, and she cuffed him on the ear and swatted him from one side of the house to the other side of the house and made his life a living hell. One day, Marlinchin came home from school and said, "Mother, you know, I would love an apple." A red, juicy apple? Yes. She said, "Well, darling, you know where I keep them. They're upstairs. They're in that chest, the one with the very, very heavy lid and the iron clasp that ends in a razor-sharp point." "Oh, yes, I know." She said, "Well, come up with me." So up the stairs they go, and she lifted and lifted that heavy, heavy lid with the sharp razor point of a clasp, and dear Marlinchin reached in for an apple, but being a sweet and considerate child, she looked at her mother and said, "Oh, shan't brother have one too?" Fury seized her. The mother took that apple, she threw it back into the chest, and she slammed shut the lid. She spied the boy coming home from school. She met him downstairs. She said, boy, would you like an apple? A whole red juicy apple? One that's not brown around the edges, half eaten, no half worms sticking out? By the way, you have a very strange look in your eye, Mother. But I would love an apple. Well, you know where I keep them. They're upstairs. They're in the chest, the one with the very heavy lid and the iron clasp that ends in a razor-sharp point. Oh, I've always heard about it, but I never had the privilege to go. She said, today's your lucky day. Follow me. And up the stairs they went. And the mother lifted and lifted that heavy, heavy lid. And the boy reached in for an apple. She said, oh, my dear, the finer ones, the redder ones, are more toward the back. Why don't you just lean over a little farther? And he did, bending his neck, exposing the innocent hairs on the back of his neck. And as soon as he was deeply bent over, she slammed shut the lid, cutting off his head. And his head went rolling around among the apples. Oh, she screamed, what have I done? She wasn't upset that she had just decapitated her own son. No, she kept thinking, what if my husband finds out? What if my husband finds out? Will all the money still go to me and my daughter? So she raised the lid, she retrieved the head, she placed it back on his body, took her finest white kerchief, wrapped it around his neck, took the body, placed him on a chair in front of the kitchen, and put an apple in his hand. Marlinchen passed by and saw that her brother already had an apple. Well, this wasn't fair. So she went back in the kitchen and she said, Mother, you told me I had to wait until brother came home from school, and he has an apple. By the way, he looks very pale. And he won't share. She said, this is what you do. You go back, you ask him to share the apple. If he doesn't share the apple, you ball up your little fist and you give him a swift box on the ear. So she went back. And of course, she asked her brother, but he said nothing. But being a dutiful daughter, she took her little fist, she gave him a swift box on the ear. Oh, she said, Mother, his head is rolling down the hole. I think I killed him. And she went back into the kitchen where her mother was already stirring a big pot of boiling water. And she said, oh, you naughty girl, what have you done? Well, there's nothing for it. We'll just have to chop, 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 chop them up in a nice little, right little culinary stew. Meanwhile, Marlinchen is standing there and her tears are falling into the pot, so it needed no salt. The father came home and said, Wife, what's for dinner? I am ravenous. And by the way, where's my son? Oh, she said, your dead wife's uncle came for an unexpected visit and he invited the boy to go off to the country with him. That's very strange. The father said he wouldn't just go without saying goodbye to me. And meanwhile, Marlinchen is crying in the corner. And he said, don't worry, dear, you'll see your brother again soon. And he said, Wife, where's dinner? And she set the stew before him. And he said, but it's still very strange. My son isn't here. She said, no, the uncle took him. Oh, and they're going to be gone for 6 weeks. They're going to have a wonderful time. And he started to eat. And he sucked the flesh off the bones, and he said, oh, this is delicious, and I feel as though it's mine, it's all mine, and you shall have none of it. And he started to eat, and then throw the bones under the table. Marlinchen went and got her finest silk kerchief, and she sat under the table, collecting every last bone until she had them all. She put them in her kerchief, tied it up, brought it outside, and placed it beneath the juniper tree. All of a sudden, the branches started to sway back and forth as though the branches were clapping, as though the tree were happy. And all of a sudden, there was a mist and there was a flame. And from this flame, there flew a magnificent bird with green iridescent feathers and a golden circlet about its neck and began to sing this song. And you can join our bloody choruses if you will.
Stepmother killed me, my father, he ate me. Pretty little Marlinchen gathered my bones. Then she did lay me beneath the fine juniper tree. Coo-it-coo-I, what a pretty bird am I. Coo-it-coo-I, what a pretty bird am I.
And the bird flew and flew and flew until it came to a goldsmith's house. The goldsmith had just finished making a golden necklace when he heard the bird sing.
Stepmother killed me, my father, he ate me.
It was magnificent.
And
he went outside.
Then she did lay me
Bird, I didn't hear your whole song. Would you please sing it again for me? And the bird said,
Nay, I'll not sing it twice for nothing.
You shall have to give me something for it. Oh, wait. And he went and got the golden chain and he tossed it up to the bird. The bird caught it in its right talon and continued to sing the song.
My stepmother killed me, my father he ate me, and pretty little Marlin she gathered my bones. Then she did lay me beneath the fine juniper tree. Coo-it-coo-I, what a pretty bird am I. Coo-it-coo-I, what a pretty bird am I.
And the bird flew and flew and flew until it came to a shoemaker's house. The shoemaker had just finished fashioning a beautiful pair of red shoes when again he heard the bird sing.
Lay me beneath the fine juniper tree. Coo-it-coo-I, what a pretty bird am I.
But he went outside and said, Bird, I didn't hear your whole song. It sounds so beautiful. Would you please sing it again for me? And the bird said,
Nay, I'll not sing it twice for nothing.
You shall have to give me something for it. And he called, Wife, bring me the red shoes. And he said to the bird, Will this do? And he tossed up the shoes. And the bird caught it in its left hand and began to sing.
My stepmother killed me, my father he ate me, pretty little Marlin chin gathered my bones. Then she did lay me beneath the fine juniper tree. Coo-it-coo-I, what a pretty bird.
And the bird flew and flew and flew until it came to a mill. And there were 20 millers fashioning a big millstone. Hick-hack, hick-hack. And the bird was singing. And one miller came out. He beckoned 2 more millers. Hick-hack, hick-hack. 3 more millers came out. 4 more millers. Hick-hack, hick-hack. Another 5 until the final and 20th miller came out and said, Oh, bird, I did not hear your song. Would you please sing it again? And the bird said, you could join us. Nay, I'll not sing it twice for nothing. You shall have to give me something for it. And the miller said, Well, if this millstone belonged to me alone, I would give it to you, but it belongs to 20 millers. Oh, but they all said, yes, let's give the bird the millstone. And it took all 20 men, and they lifted and lifted and lifted that millstone, but it fit around the bird's neck, just as light as a collar. And the bird began to sing.
My stepmother killed me, my father he ate me, pretty little Marlin chin gathered my bones. Then she did lay me.
And the bird flew and flew and flew until it landed in a linden tree and came back to its own home. And inside, the father, the daughter, and the mother were sitting down to supper. When all of a sudden they heard this magnificent song. The father said, Oh, I must go outside. I feel happy. I feel like I'm going to meet an old friend again. But his wife pulled him back and said, No, please don't go. I feel as though the earth is going to swallow me up. I feel as though this is the end of days. Please don't go. But he shook her off and out he went. And as soon as he did, the bird dropped the golden chain and it fit around his neck perfectly. He went back inside and said, Look at the gift the bird gave me. And Marlinchin said, I want to go outside. Maybe the bird has a gift for me too. And her mother pulled her back and said, Please don't go. I have a raging headache. I feel as though my blood is boiling. My hair is on fire. Please don't go. I feel as though it's the end of days. And she said, No, mother, I must. And she shook her off and out she went. And as soon as Marlinchin went out, the bird dropped the red shoes. She put them on her feet, and she danced around, and she danced right back in the house, and she said, Mother, look at the gift the bird gave me. Why don't you go outside? Maybe the bird has a gift for you, too. And she said, No, I mustn't go. I just feel so like this is the end of days, and my blood is boiling, and I have such a headache. But they gave her no rest, and out the door she went, and as soon as she did, the bird let fly the millstone, flattening her, and she was no more. But there was a mist, and from that mist there stepped a young boy, who indeed was red as blood and as white as snow. And he took his sister's hand, and he took his father's hand, and all 3 went in for supper.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have 5 more minutes? Do we have a few more minutes? Yes. Okay. So now we thank you so much for your kind attention, and I hope that you can be feeling very secure by putting your slippers on either side of, pointing in different directions. But it looks like the children weathered those songs and stories very well. But we did want to leave you on a lighter note. And we have a song that Amy composed, and then a short little nature story about everything being connected.
So this song is called Everything You Touch. Everything you touch makes a difference. Everything you see is a part of you. Everything you feel has expression. It's up to you. You choose. You don't have to be a hero or a headline in the news. Even in your silence, you choose. Everything you touch makes a difference. Everything you see is a part of you. Everything you feel has expression. It's up to you. You choose. It may not seem to matter. It may seem out of your hands, but everything you touch makes a difference. Everything you see is a part of you. Each time you make a choice to lift your hands or use your voice, something's touched, something's changed, part of forever rearranged. Seem to matter. It may seem out of your hands, but everything you touch makes a difference. Everything you see is a part of you. Everything you feel has expression. It's up to you. You choose. Thank you.
We did unashamedly bring our CDs and some books with us, just in case you want to take a little bit of us home with you today, and holidays and birthdays are coming up, stocking stuffers and so on. We have them over here, and we'll be happy to sign them and talk to you about them in case anybody wants any, in a way to support independent artists. But we'll tell you one short story that has to do with everything being connected. There was once a chief who lived way, 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 way out in a foreign land, in a village around a swamp. Do you know what a swamp is? What's a swamp?
It's like a really muddy place.
A really muddy place of water, right. And all kinds of things lived in that swamp, including frogs. So the frogs lived in the swamp. And there was a very mean chief who was in charge of this village, and anything he said had to go, or he would punish all the villagers. Well, in this swamp there were these frogs, and every night the frogs would have a beautiful little concert, and all the villagers loved to listen to their lovely little sounds. You can all help me with little ribbit, 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 ribbit. But one night, the villagers felt it was like a lullaby. But one night, the king must have had a stomach ache or a headache, and he woke up. And the frogs were particularly talkative that night.
Ribbit, ribbit, ribbit.
Everybody, ribbit, 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 ribbit. And they were making so much noise. They were just making so much noise that the next morning our cruel chief woke up and said to the villagers, "Get rid of all the frogs." The old wise woman in the town said, "You'll be sorry." Can you say that?
You'll be sorry.
Because everything is connected. But he didn't understand what she meant. She said everything is connected. But he ordered all the villagers to take their sticks and go down to the swamp and beat the water so that the frogs would all hop away. And sure enough, they disappeared. The next night was so calm and peaceful and quiet, and the king thought that he had done the right thing. And he just slept and slept and slept. But the next night wasn't so comfortable at all, because all of a sudden, bzz, 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 bzz. Ow! Ow! Could you do that? Ow! 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 Ouch! 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 Ouch!
Mosquito, 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 get away from me, everyone.
Sing this.
Mosquito, 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 get away from me. Here we go.
Ow!
Mosquito, 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 get away from me.
Ow! Ow! Ow!
Mosquito, 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 get away from me. Here we go. Zzz, 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 zzz,
So, what the king didn't realize was that the frogs ate the mosquitoes and kept the mosquito population down. And now he understood the old lady's words that all things were connected. And the king ordered all the villagers to get rid of the mosquitoes. Could they do that? No, there were thousands and millions of mosquitoes, and he ordered them, "You get rid of those mosquitoes or I will have a terrible punishment for all of you." And in the middle of the night, all the villagers packed up their belongings and they left that village to start someplace else. And when the king awakened the next morning, he was no longer really a king because he had no villagers to rule over. And only now did he get that all things are connected. Let's sing our song one more time.
1, 2, 3, 4. Mosquitoes, mosquitoes, mosquito, get away from me. Sing it out. Mosquitoes, mosquitoes, mosquito, get away from me. Here we go. Zzz, 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 zzz. One more time. Zzz, zzz. Last time. Here we go. Mosquitoes, mosquitoes, mosquito, get away from me. Mosquito, mosquitoes, mosquito, get away from me. Zzz, 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 zzz. Thank you. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you so much to everyone here at the Ethical Humanists, and I'm Judith Heineman. And
Amy Lowe. I'm Amy Lowe. Thank you,
Lowe.
Judith.
Yes, and thank you so much for your sweet and kind attention.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I was curious, the two longer stories involved kind of two themes, humans eating human flesh and female being the actual person. Are these themes common from the, 12th or 13th centuries or something?
It's interesting. That was recently a debate on the, there's a storytelling listserv. Anybody's interested, you can go to storytell.org, and you don't have to be a storyteller to be privy to some of these conversations. There was just a conversation like women are always painted as these ogresses. Well, traditionally they were, but men too. And so we're really looking for other stories where maybe the men are sort of more, but it's usually the women who die, or, the men have to take the stepmother. It's a cliche. But, a lot of these stories came from servants. And what they really were metaphors for the cruelty that their own masters perpetrated upon them. And in the guise of these stories, it was a way to vent. And so that perhaps the ogress represents some cruel master, in the relationship. So a lot of these stories really hit those. And these stories are very, very old. You go way, way, way back in time, from the 11th century, 12th century, Italians and so on were, and even like 1697, the Perrault things, those stories. So they were even earlier than that. But we'll all be on a lookout so that it's not always the poor woman who's blamed. Any other questions? Yeah. Feel free to chime in.
Can you tell us about how, when you got started on this, and how many performances you give? And are they often for children, or do you go around to the schools, that kind of thing? Well,
so I came to Chicago 22 years ago, if you couldn't tell, from New York. And I'm living back in New York mostly today. But I was touring with Dan Marcotte, who actually is on the CD and who accompanied me originally on Renaissance Lute. And we were Illinois Humanities Council Rhodes Scholars because we went on the road for many, many years, Illinois Arts Council artists. And I always had a theater background. I was also an educator. I was a high school English and journalism teacher in New York City, but also performed off-Broadway and off-Broadway in the evenings. So I've always had a theater connection. But when I moved to Chicago, actually, I went to Jonesboro, Tennessee, to the National Storytelling Festival. Has anybody else been down there? It's amazing. There are 3 days of nonstop stories, and 10,000 people listen to simply stories all day, all night, with huge circus tents that house between 1,500 and 2,000 people, and you listen to stories from morning till night, including ghost stories and a raunchy midnight cabaret. When I went, I was doing one-woman shows, and I saw this genre. I went in 1997, and I realized that this genre sort of grabbed me around the neck and didn't let go, and I could take my one-woman shows and turn them into stories. And I started researching, going to conferences and so on, and I founded the Chicago Storytelling Guild, and Dan, this young man, came in, and I can't remember what it was, but we got a request at a museum or a library, and then we started developing. Somebody wanted us to do scary stories, and he loved, which we didn't do, but it's on the CD, a bear skin. And I always was haunted by some Grimm tales, and I wanted to learn them. So we started this 20 years ago, really. And so we have toured in many, many, many different iterations. We also did Mesopotamian and Egyptian stories for the Oriental Institute and have a CD of that. And there's summer reading programs. So I've traveled the world. I've told stories in Japan, China, Ireland, and England. I'm happy. And Amy and I are now partnering. And Amy is a magnificent Ravinia teaching artist as well, and a brilliant musician. And we're each individually or together happy to go wherever anyone wants stories and songs. So I hope that answered your question. So this show particularly, I must have done 500 times in different variations. So, and I'm very grateful for Amy for stepping into the show, and she, I think, did a brilliant job. So thank you.
On a little different track, could you tell us a bit about your humanist background?
Oh, my humanist background. Okay, so when I moved to Los Angeles, I became part of the Sholem Society, which was a secular humanist Jewish society, where it said this was Judaism for the rest of us, whatever your proclivities were. And then I came to Chicago, and we didn't have bar and bar mitzvahs, we had graduations. And we were looking for my daughter to continue. She was about to be 13, and we found the Secular Humanist Jewish Society here in Chicago. that was in Skokie and it was in Chicago. And so I can't remember Malka's last name, but you may know her. She was the teacher. So we have always kept humanist values in our background with a little Jewish flavor. And so I'm very much at home here, and I feel, very close to all the sensibilities of the humanists. So there you go.
More questions, anybody? Then I'm going to take the prerogative of the moderator to ask one, and probably the last one for the morning. You've kind of alluded to how the Grimm tales got cleaned up over time, and the original are a little bloodier than what we have experienced. Can you talk about how that happened, why it happened, who did it?
So the Grimm brothers were collecting these stories, and what they really, Germany hadn't been put together as a unified country yet. It was in different city-states. And what they thought they were really doing was collecting the history and the manners of the German people, and they wanted to codify it with these stories. And again, people think the Grimms wrote these stories, but they really didn't. They collected it and they adapted it. There were, I think, 6 or 7 editions. The first edition was 1812, 1815, where we took these stories, because they are the darker ones, not the Disney endings, and Cinderella, that's also on the CD, the sisters' toes and heels are cut off and their eyes are plucked out, and, which you don't see in Disney. And but I really like it much better. I hate scary movies, but I love to make the audience jump. So anyway, so these stories are so in those first editions, they were very, very dark. Children's literature didn't exist as a genre yet. Then they realized that they could sell more books if they refined it, and other critics criticized them for their rough language. So it's Wilhelm and Yakov, and I can't remember, I think it was Yakov, who did the refining, and he changed the language, he smoothed out the words, and what's really interesting is that they kept the violence in, but they took the sex out. So if you remember Rapunzel, she has a long, long braid, remember, and she pulls up the prince, and in the very first edition, you will find it nowhere else, when her keeper comes up to check on her, her clothes don't fit anymore. And she said, "How come my clothes don't fit anymore?" And the keeper says, "Oh, you naughty girl." So, she obviously had relations with the prince who she hauled up. And that was in the first edition, but they took that out. So they did refine the stories in 6 or 7 more editions. And if you have the complete collection, the mother-in-law story is separate. The Children Play at Slaughtering is separate. But it depends if you have a really good translator like Jack Zipes, who really stuck to the original Blood and Gore. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. So I think that wraps it up for us. We're going to take a moment, folks. Don't leave yet. We're going to do some announcements. But again, thank you very much for being with us today. Another round of applause for Judith and Amy.
You were great singers.